Another Friday episode of Wellness Unfiltered. My two co-hosts have abandoned me today, so I went scouring the internet for the most intelligent, witty, and capable female that I could find. And it didn't take very long before I came up with Nicki, who was actually on Wellness Unplugged recently, and we did an amazing episode. She was incredibly brave and vulnerable in sharing her own personal story. And so I thought, who better to come back and talk around this topic of self-punishment, self-abuse, and when we struggle with negative self-talk. So welcome back, Nicki.
Thanks for having me. That was quite the introduction. I'll take it.
Yeah, I try to think of usually something creative, kind of off the cuff. And so this idea of beating ourselves up, that's a really, it's an interesting thing to touch on. And I think it's probably a sensitive topic for a lot of people because the behavior is probably more common than we would like to acknowledge. It's one that logically we know we probably shouldn't do, and yet we still do it. Can you remember, thinking back when the first time was that you might have wanted to kind of like beat yourself up for making a mistake, or when you became aware of this unhelpful behavior?
I don't know when it started. I honestly don't know that. I can answer when I became aware of it, and that would be probably within the last 2 years. I think I was starting to become aware of it before then, but I wasn't in a place, it was like, okay, here I go again. But there was no stopping it. It was like the tiniest bit of awareness, but that was it. Whereas now I still do it. I mean, I still can't believe those words came out of my mouth on the last podcast, but if I'm honest, like I do still catch myself going to that place and starting down that road. And most of the time I can catch myself and pull myself out of it. But there's still the odd time where I'm like, oh, well, here I go again.
Yeah. How about that? Here I go again. That's kind of there's a phrase of like, almost like there's no hope. You're broken. Why do you keep doing this? As though we're trying to, I don't know if there's an element trying to give yourself a pep talk to get out of it, or because I've often wondered, because I think you and I, we've both struggled with this behavior, but it actually kind of took opposite directions. So for me, I would eat food sometimes out of spite, almost like punishing myself and punishing my body for being fat and for not losing the weight like I was trying to force it to do. What did it look like for you?
Actually, that's really interesting when you say it like that, because on one of my podcasts, I talk about always being labeled as skinny and too skinny and all those words. And so I wonder, I've never really figured out why I chose what I did, because mine would be to like dehydrate myself, eat really sparingly. If I would go a day without really eating. And if I did eat, it would have zero nutritional value, zero anything. Like it wouldn't be necessarily junk food, but it would just have zero nutritional value, like nothing nutritional. And I wonder now, hearing you say that, if it was to kind of go back to that label of just being skinny.
Now that's a really interesting one, because when we get into this topic of sort of health and wellness, weight loss is one that really dominates the market or the headlines a lot, because it is a very, very common problem that actually the majority of our population struggles with. And so I think it's a really valid discussion. But there'd be people who might struggle with their weight, who would hear you talk about being too skinny, and in a sense, they might be, I don't want to, like, triggered might be like too sensitive or too strong a word to use, but there would be a sense of like, oh, how do you know it? Too skinny, like, is that even possible without necessarily diving into the realm of anorexia? But where does that idea come from?
It's not something I say out loud very often, because I get the, oh, really? Are you really complaining about that? Right. And I get it. I understand. But for the first half of my life, maybe not the first half, once I found beer, it changed a little bit. But, the first 15 years of my life, I was too skinny. My mom had to take in 00 pants. And I'm not like, I'm 5'6", so it's not like I'm 5 feet tall. So having to take in size 00 pants, I was a toothpick. I heard it all. Do you have a hollow leg? Because I ate. Like I'm not a small eater. I've always eaten healthy and I've always exercised, but I'm not a small eater. So it's like, do you have a hollow leg? So many things. How do you find clothes that fit you? And all of these things that just over the years, they built up a different complex from someone that has the opposite problem. And again, it's a very sensitive topic, so I'm very careful what I say about it or who I talk to about it. But having the label of too skinny hurts as well. And it creates body image problems as well.
It still puts us in this place that there's something about my physical body that is imperfect that I wish people didn't notice or comment on or pay attention to. And, I think about this because I obviously have a young son. He'll be 8 months old soon, and I think about how already, like, kind of how we talk about him, and we think he's the cutest boy in the world. Not that we're biased or anything, but everything he does at this age is incredibly cute. He's got two little teeth, and he grins away, and his two bottom teeth show, and he's just shaping some of his first words, and of course we adore him. And babies have slightly oversized heads and big eyes, and like they're adorable, but
Mhm.
I think about how we then make a lot of our dialogue around, even like our own children, about like appearance, and then it makes us really sort of sensitive to that. And was that something you encountered, or you can recall encountering a lot as a kid?
Absolutely, and I'm seeing it now, like, my daughter's 9, and even her Halloween costume today, I've shared it and sent it to family, and "Oh, she's so pretty. Oh, she's so pretty." And, of course, she's gorgeous, she's beautiful, she's
Mm,
my daughter,
yeah,
same thing, I'm only a little biased.
yeah,
But, it's not, "Wow, how creative." It's
right,
not,
yeah,
"Wow, what a great choice." It's, "Oh, she's so pretty." And she's already getting the same thing about being told she's too skinny or the words, "There's nothing to her." And I have to be really careful. Like, my heart breaks every time I hear these things because I'm hearing them as a 9-year-old child. And I
right,
have to be careful not to put my stuff on her. But she's already coming to me and telling me that she doesn't like it when people comment on her body.
yeah,
So it just tells me that we haven't changed much in the
mhm,
last 30 years.
interesting.
And that scares me a bit.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I've often made the remark, like, we have two eyeballs for a reason, and so and what I mean by that is, like, human beings, we are visual creatures, and
Mhm,
we sort of have. I'm not sure, someone would be more qualified than me to sort of discuss how we develop our sense of what is beautiful and what is not, and what is attractive and what is not, and so on. Um, but I think I would say that these behaviors still exist because there's sort of in more of our primal brain, we are drawn to things that are attractive. We want to comment on the attractiveness, and uh, um, it probably takes a couple generations to change the dialogue around this, where we actually have to consciously think about, I have to make a comment or a compliment that doesn't involve someone's appearance. If somebody gets a haircut, well, we're expected to comment on that, or hair coloring, or their nails done, or things like that. Like, it's just it's almost like an easy win, and so it's easy to start with something like that in a conversation because it will, generally speaking, make the person feel good when they're positively commented on their appearance.
Well, I think that's the flip side of it. I mean, as a woman, I certainly like being told that I'm beautiful, or, if anyone throws those compliments out there, it's like, "Oh, thank you." Now, in that sense, it depends who they're coming from, what context they're coming to me under, right? Like, I mean, sometimes they don't feel good, but for the most part, we like being complimented on our appearance as well. So I find it's like this catch 22 where I don't want it to be all about our appearance. I don't want it to be all about my appearance, but yet it's still important.
Yeah,
So it's just everything's a balance.
it's something that carries a degree of social currency, again, whether we like it or not. And I think I don't know that we'll ever be able to entirely get away from this discussion around physical appearance, because it it is it is kind of wired into our primal biology, if I can
Mhm,
put it that way. And to kind of move past it requires quite a bit of conscious thought, and that's not an easy thing to do, because the more sort of tired and stressed and overwhelmed we are as a society, the more we sort of default to more of our primal type behaviors, which are going to go to things like appearance. And so
mhm,
to kind of swing back to a topic of like self punishment and like self abuse and whatnot, compliments and maybe discussions around our appearance and around our body can potentially set us up for this pattern of behavior. Maybe when we don't live up to the ideal that we hold in our head that we're supposed to
mhm.
ascribe to, or to be like. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I honestly, this is a tough topic for me. Like I said, when those words came out of my mouth, I don't know if I'd ever actually said them in that way before. So I processed it a bit after that episode, and then today, we talked about it for 30 seconds before we went live, and it was kind of like,
It's like,
oh,
let's go live.
yeah. And so I apologize if I don't have all the answers, but I
You're not expected
do
to, actually.
think that the self-punishment that I've chosen now, I
Mhm.
do think that it does come from body image that started when I was very young, and that has just been, said to me over and over. And so it kind of makes sense that I would pick something that other people have picked up on about my physical appearance.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, because that was sort of want to say conditioned into your brain at an early age. There's a certain standard you're expected to live up to, and when you don't live
Yeah.
up to the standard, you feel a sense of maybe guilt, shame, or disappointment, and then somehow you want to alleviate that. Because I like to sort of scratch under the surface and try to make sense of why the behavior occurs or where it might have come from. And uh, my friend Hingle here, which obviously is a pseudonym, says, "I continue to hate, degrade, and punish myself regardless, but I appreciate your dialogue and I love the open conversations." And thank you, Hingle. We'll keep your identity a secret, but and actually, this is coming from a male who, personally, I think is conventionally quite attractive. He's got a great physique, and he's actually got quite a good personality to go with it. So I'm sort of fluffing him a little bit there, but regardless, I think that's something that men struggle with as well. And so,
Oh, absolutely.
I think, okay, well, where does this behavior come from? And I think we can be abusive towards ourselves in one sense because we don't have any choice but to take it. In other words, we can't really run away from ourselves, and so we end up using ourselves like a punching bag for all of our difficult emotions because we don't know how to process them appropriately, or how to sit with those feelings and feel them. And that could also come from potentially just like being punished as kids for sort of acting out and misbehaving, which is usually a product of having difficult emotions and not knowing how to process them and deal with them.
Absolutely. I think we're trained from a young age that if we act out and it's becoming from a place of emotion, we get punished, sent to your room, time out in the corner, calm down. How many times I've heard calm down in my life, and it's like,
Mm.
I'm calm. I'm just expressing something to you. But I think like it's such an interesting one for me because, again, going back to the too skinny thing, it's like I punish myself by not eating, but I
Yeah.
hate being told I'm too skinny. So it's like in a way I must like it but it's just formed such a part of my self-identity that it's, yeah. And I mean, I'm still would be considered skinny. I still don't like the word. I prefer healthy, fit, so many other words to skinny, but I know that societally speaking, I'm considered skinny.
Yeah.
So
On the other hand, I'm often referred to as big guy, which, and again, I'm not overly bothered or sensitive about that anymore. But when I was sort of at the height of my obesity, it was, it stung quite a bit because it was shining a glaring light on my physical size. And I think people weren't necessarily aware of how sensitive it was because I was male. It's just like because I'm a fairly big guy. I'm 6'1" and broad shouldered. Like I have quite a big physique, and I have quite a physical presence if I want to.
mhm.
Um, so it's just natural to refer to me as that. And when ironically, I'm actually just a teddy bear. I'm just a gentle-hearted guy. I didn't ask to necessarily be this size, but it makes us so aware of it. One of the things I wanted to say that I appreciate is your willingness to talk about this is still a struggle that you battle with because um, even the willingness to talk about this is still a behavior that I know is unhelpful, but it still continues to show up, and it's still something that I'm working on. I think.
Well, yeah, sorry. I thought you were done.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's really valuable to have these conversations where people see us in the journey, in the in progress or a work in progress stage, where it's like I'm aware this behavior is unhelpful. Logically, it comes from that prefrontal cortex, but there's a behavior pattern here that still exists. That it takes time to unwire these things in our brain.
Well, and I think for me, I think the biggest thing is it absolutely is a punishment. And I, again, now, because it always comes after something, whether it's something I've done that I'm mad at myself for, or something has happened in my life that has made me upset. And even, 43 years old, degree in psychology, spent lots of time in therapy, I still cannot process my emotions to the point that I don't do this. And like the person that commented, I honestly don't know if I will ever truly be able to stop this. Like even when I catch myself in the moment or in that spiral, so to speak, sometimes I can stop it. And other times I just go, oh, well, here I go again.
Yeah.
And I will stop it, but I don't stop it in that moment. It takes me, it's like I almost have to go through the motions and make myself feel worse before I can feel better.
There's I wonder if we could say there's a degree of indulgence in that behavior as well. Like there's a certain ironic familiarity with the behavior. If we think about the term abuse, because I think it's quite strong language to use to say like that we were or have some patterns of like abuse towards ourselves. For me, punishing myself, and I very often say like if I ever spoke to a friend the way that I used to speak to myself in the privacy of my own head, I would not have a single friend in the world. Uh,
No, none of us would.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, the way that we view ourselves and speak to ourselves very often frames our interaction with other people because we start out with, well, this is how I see myself. So I'm going to
Mhm.
assume this is how somebody else sees me.
It's so hard to overcome though, because I have done exercises where like a coach that is like, they've had me do the look in the mirror and tell yourself you're me, like all the things, or go to your like top three friends or important people in your life and get them to write down their three top words for you, or trying to get the perspective of how somebody else sees me. And I read the words that they would write and I'd be like, well, that doesn't help me because I don't agree with any of them. So it depending on the place I'm in, if I'm in a good place and mentally, emotionally, physically, all of the things are there and the synergy is there, and someone gives me a compliment or tells me I am those things, I can receive them like no problem. Thank you so much. Right. It's
Yeah.
so easy to receive when you're in a good place. But when you're not in a good place, the walls go up instantly. And I'm like, how can you see me like that when in my head, I'm telling me myself I'm dumb, I'm awful, I'm stupid, all these awful things. And so the disconnect is massive for me.
Yeah, and I think what that speaks to is that it comes from two different areas of the brain. And you've highlighted something really important here. The more like tired or weary we are, um,
I lost you.
I can still hear you. You're just kind of frozen there. Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
there we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this it was interesting because you were like frozen in place, and then this voice comes out, "I lost you." That sounded like it was coming from like a cave or something like that. That's the joy of doing this live. But yeah, this behavior, it's coming from a different part of the brain. So the more tired we are, the more difficult it is to tap into, say, our prefrontal cortex, kind of use that logical processing and reasoning to counter the emotional energy that's coming forward. The This other thing coming from sort of a more primal part of our brain is um, because it's been ingrained for so many years. It's very, very like the whole neurons that fire together wire together. If this pattern has existed for 30 years, and you've only really started trying to create change and disconnect this pattern over the last couple of years, um, that's why it's probably going to keep taking you a while
Yeah.
longer yet to actually make that change because it's existed as a pattern, maybe a sense of identity and a set of beliefs for like since childhood.
Well, and that's one thing that one of like the therapist I went to, that's what she, at the time I was 37, and she's like, you have to understand you've had the same pattern for 37 years. You're not going to change this overnight. Like you have to put in the time, you have to put in the effort, you have to do the exercises, you have to be conscious of this, you have to be aware of it. And it's interesting when you talked about the being tired, because that's absolutely one of the things that sets me off is if I'm not getting enough sleep, if
Mhm.
I go out, if I drink too much.
Yeah,
All
no,
of those are my huge triggers.
yeah, anything that affects our ability to emotionally regulate.
Mhm.
And so alcohol is another one of those, right? It tends to lower our inhibitions, but also lowers kind of our ability to emotionally regulate when these things start to appear. Um, you mentioned affirmations, and I jotted a note down. So if you ever see me glancing to the side, it's I'm usually making a note about something you mentioned
I
because I
know I
want to.
get scared every time I see you do it. I'm like, "Oh, no, what did he catch me on this time?"
Well, affirmations are a really interesting one because it's often maybe a type of exercise that's suggested to try to correct this behavior, like just like look in the mirror and say these affirmations. But you highlighted something really important is that when we don't believe what we're saying at the core of our being, this is kind of a hollow mechanic. It's not really a meaningful or necessarily helpful action. I think back to in school, we were even going back to like elementary school, learning about self esteem and trying to have more self esteem. And like my brother's an educator, he's been an educator for a couple of decades now. And he said, "Here's the thing: kids know when you're handing them a participation ribbon that they haven't really earned it." You know, the idea that, just for showing up and trying, you get a ribbon and to try to make everybody feel good. He's like, they actually know because my brother teaches overseas in other countries, in other cultures, they're very competitive still, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But they know when they're being handed a participation ribbon, they didn't really earn it. And so where I'm going with this is, I think we know when we're giving ourselves a hollow platitude.
Oh, I was gonna say that's why I've always had a problem with affirmations, and that's the wrong way to approach this. It's not that I've had problems with them, it's
Mhm.
that they have absolutely been hollow for me. And when I have coaches or therapists and they would give me these exercises and I'd look at them and I'd go, I can't do this because it does not click with where I'm at emotionally. Like I have to take baby steps. And so one of them said, change them around, right? Like don't make them as today, make them that you're on your way there.
Yeah.
So depending on what I was working on or there's so many words for all this stuff, limiting beliefs, affirmations, like so many catchphrases for lack of a better word. I've heard them all. I've done them all. I've kind of been there, done that on all of this. But again, if I'm not in the right headspace, none of it works. So the question that I really had to answer was, how do I get into the right headspace so that all of this work actually resonates where it needs to resonate?
Hmm. And again, I want to highlight like how much I appreciate and the importance of us being open about this is where we're at in our journey. It's something that we're working through, and it's not something that changes overnight. That's a real challenge because again, some people, let's say maybe they never heard you speak about these issues publicly. They might know you in your professional setting, and again, see like a highly capable, highly intelligent, highly successful professional woman, and we'll maybe get the idea that you have everything together, that you've got everything sorted out. And so to understand that it's actually possible to be successful, intelligent, capable, and all these things, and still have a struggle that's with you, and that could be with you. It could be with you for life, really, in one sense. And that's something that we can, in one sense, make peace with, because there is no destination perfection.
No, I've had to accept that. I think when I started this journey, it would have been like 20, probably I always say my divorce started it, but I think it started before my divorce. And I think it led to ultimately to my divorce because I knew that I wanted to grow and I wanted to do some things inside. And I wasn't able to do that in the space that I was in. But yeah, it's a tough one. It is. And I don't think that I will ever reach the end of whatever this destination is. I have to look at it where I am today. And I saw a meme floating around about the person I am today, thanks to the person I was 5 years ago. And I look back and I'm like, I am so grateful for the person I was 5 years ago. Or even this week, I had a complete, I call them Nicki moments, malfunction, spiral, whatever you want to call them. And I had reached out to my coach because I was full on melting down. I have lots of stuff going on with my brother's estate. I just have a lot of stuff. The pressure, I have a water leak. Like the pressure was just mounting. And I just started this downward spiral. And she just basically, when I get like that, it's almost impossible for me to communicate. It's almost impossible for me to think logically. And I will do anything to stop how I feel. And so I just said
Right.
to him, like, I just need this feeling to stop. So like, I'm done. I am done with everything. Leave me alone, basically. And then I had a session with her yesterday and I almost canceled because then I was embarrassed, right? I was embarrassed that I had this huge spiral and that I spoke to her the way that I did. And I just felt awful about it. And again, all of these emotions. And it's just the reminder that it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And I have 43 years of behaviors and things that have led me to the person I am today. And I can't erase those even in 5 years. And
Yeah.
I don't want to erase them because they are me at the
Right. They're
same
they're
time, right?
they're part of like who you're actually quite an inspiring person, and I shouldn't even put the qualifier actually in there as though I'm surprised. You are like an inspiring person, and you mentioned like experiencing this downward spiral, I, and then maybe feeling a sense of shame or guilt around the fact that this occurred. And yet, if we take a step back and we go, did you want this to happen? Did you try to create this happening? No, you didn't ask
No.
for this, right? But this is, your brain was reaching a point of overwhelm because, I mean, gosh, you've processed a lot, especially like in the last 5, 6, 7 years. Like you've processed like a lifetime worth of difficult experiences in a very
Yes.
short window of time with a really limited amount of support to lean on as well.
Yes. Yeah. I know some people, I don't want to say they make fun of me because I don't know, but I
Mm.
know that people have maybe criticized me for always having a therapist or always having a coach. But for me, it's a couple things. The tools they give me are not something that my friends can provide because they don't have the education. They just don't have those tools to provide me. And I don't have I have some amazing friends, which I spoke about on Wellness Unplugged, and I wouldn't like I love them. but I also can only put so much on them and they can only do so much for me. A lot of this stuff is not something that friends can actually help. Like you actually need professionals to
Mhm.
help you work through this. And like my spiral that started on Monday, it started and in like an instant, every negative thing that had ever happened to me with a man, like just knocked me right over something that was so innocent. And
Yeah.
it just took me to a place that every hurt, every lie, every manipulation, everything that had ever been done to me hit me all at once. And I just went, I can't do this. I can't feel like this. Everyone just needs to go away
Yeah. Yeah.
and leave me alone.
There's a couple of really interesting things that you shared here too. Like you're incredibly insightful. Um, One is like we love the fact that we have supportive friends. I think that's valuable. But in the same token, we don't necessarily want to add like a 10-ton lead weight to our friendships and go, this, I expect you to help me process this. You know, friendships are crucial as a part of our support network, but we don't necessarily want to dump everything onto them. And then the idea um, that it's thought, you said maybe criticized or made fun of, or the fact that people are potentially uncomfortable with the fact that you
That's a better
choose
word.
Mm. that you choose to seek out professional support, and that you're actually, interestingly, secure enough in your imperfections to say, "I need this support, and it's hugely helpful because I want to continue to grow. I want to continue to develop." And then you take somebody who is maybe afraid to do something like this because it's actually going to expose, or they're going to have to confront the fact that they are imperfect, or that they have these struggles. Like the idea that there's a stigma around going to see a therapist. I'm like, going to a doctor doesn't really have a stigma. Going to the dentist doesn't really have a stigma. Um, to go to a therapist because we're dealing with the weight of life on our shoulders, that should be such a normal and even celebrated thing that we're
Yeah.
doing this, that we're going and we're seeking out the help that we need. So
Yeah, it's really hard though, Jonathan, because to go to therapy means you're looking at the darkest parts inside of you.
fair
And
enough. Yeah.
we don't want to, like, we do everything we can to avoid that. And going back to primal instinct, survival, we don't want to face those dark parts of us because it can make us vulnerable. And something that my coach said to me when I was spiraling on Tuesday, because I think she could tell, like, it was just, I was not going to make any growth in that moment, or nothing was going to happen in that moment. And she said, you are always seeking growth. So you will, like, this is not you saying you're quitting, saying you're done, saying it's too much is you now in this moment, but it's not you. You're going to come back to wanting to grow through this and move through this. So when you do, we will do that. I mean, that's not her exact words, but, and I
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
kind of went, when I read it, I said some really bad words and I was just like, ugh.
Yeah.
And then the next day I was like, damn, that was really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also the idea that we need to be perpetually in this space of growth is maybe a pressure that we shouldn't put on ourselves.
Yeah.
We, I talk to my clients about sprints versus maintenance. There are periods of time when all the stars are aligned and like we're just making significant progress, and it's like, yes, this is amazing. The downside is we come to expect that that should be our normal, that we're always just like cruising through life, and somehow because we want to grow and develop, that life should conspire to make this easier or better for us. When in reality, there's going to be periods of time where we have to kind of fall into a holding pattern because just the day to day stuff that life is shoveling in our direction is enough for us to try to process, that we don't have space to process growth.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been my week. At the same time, I did experience, once I came out of all of this Wednesday, I posted this on my podcast page. I was having a really hard time. I couldn't find the words, which is why I just shut down, because I literally could not get the words out of my head. They were just a mess between emotions and words, and I don't just feel or hear words and up here, like, I have a physical reaction to it. And so I was feeling sick and just awful. And Wednesday I was in the shower and I was crying because that can be my place to have, a few
Yeah.
minutes. And all of a sudden, like, these words just started like forming these sentences. And I literally got out of the shower to write it all down because I was
Yeah.
like, I have to write this down. So once it's gone, it's gone. And today, I always say I cry every day. And I know that people don't necessarily believe that, but I've been dealing with some stuff on my brother's estate. And this morning, my daughter was getting ready for Halloween, and we had a few moments with her costume that she didn't like. And so she was in tears, and we were going to be late for school, and my phone was ringing and all the things. And I dropped her off at school, and I went to the gym. And this is something I used to do so often. I sat in the parking lot of the gym and I started to cry.
Yeah.
And like 5 years ago, I wouldn't have ever gone into the gym. And I was already thinking, there's no way I'm going into the gym today. And then my daughter texted, she's like, Mom, I forgot my wand. Can you bring it back to the school? So I'm like, oh, perfect. I don't have to go to the gym. So I drove back to the school, dropped off her wand, came home, worked, and then was just like, am I really going to be that person from 5 years ago where I sat in the parking lot of the gym and cried and didn't go in? Nope. So I went back to the gym, and like I said, I had to put my headphones on to cover up my gym hair. So, but it felt like I wouldn't have done that 5 years ago. I would have just said, there goes my whole day, and I'm done. I would have canceled this, like everything.
Yeah. And we wouldn't have had this great conversation. So that's a huge moment of growth. And the other thing is, the fact that you cry every day is a really healthy thing. It's a part of process. Like it's your body expressing these emotions. What I think is really interesting, you're really quite in tune with your body. The ability to, when you feel these emotions, to be like, you physically feel them somewhere in your body. When I'm working with somebody, that's one of the things that we try to talk about when we're struggling with something is, what are you feeling? And then can you locate that feeling in your body? Where are you feeling it? Start to tune into it. And, some of the things I think that you were feeling and processing, they actually come from a part of our brain that was maybe formed before we ever had language. And so it's like, I feel something and I don't know how to express it, but then you had the opportunity in the shower to kind of just like knock some of the walls down and just let these emotions flow. And as soon as that sort of was open, then the language could appear. Then you could start talking about, this is what it is, and then you come up with some really like powerful language.
One of the things that I've learned in therapy, and again, different therapists, different coaches, I take different things and I've just kind of been able to put them all together. And one of them is, I was always trying to think my way through problems, think my way through life instead of feel my way through life. And it took a lot of work, a lot of almost weird exercises to get me to feel what my body was feeling. And that is the tears, 100%. It's all of these emotions I've stuffed down for 43 years, whatever they're from, whatever person, place, incident, experience, whatever they are. They've just been buried in my body. They're not necessarily, I mean, they're buried in here somewhere too, but they're definitely buried and held within my body. And the more I can feel what I'm feeling and do that, sorry, your comment kind of like, oh, what's this? But yeah, like I've just had to feel.
Yeah. And I love that because, I had a conversation with one of my mentorship clients about exactly this, trying to think your way through a problem to actually avoid dealing with the problem. You've heard me say this because we talked about grief on our last conversation, and I said that we suck at grief, for example. And so we try to, even if we know the stages of grief, we try to cerebrally process it as opposed to actually feeling it and experiencing it in our body. And so, yeah, I wrote can't communicate. In other words, yeah, when we can't really tune into our body, we're not really going to be able to feel. We're not going to be able to put language to what it is that we feel. And so, let's maybe give some people some hope here, because we've been talking about right, which I think there is like, in one sense, maybe there's been a degree of weight to this conversation, and it seems like it's maybe kind of negative in one sense, and I don't think we've actually dove into as much of the actual sort of self-punishment as we thought we were going to. But I think there's real hope here, because I think both of us, if we look at who we were 5 years ago and who we are today, 5 years ago, I was eating pizzas in a parking lot, like hoping that nobody was going to spot me. Like in Red Deer, Little Caesars on the north end by, that's up by 67th and Gates there, getting like a stuffed crust, a deep dish, whatever from Little Caesars, and eating the entire thing in the parking lot after leaving the nutrition store that I worked at.
But there is hope. And I think the biggest thing that I just want to convey to people is, yes, the work is hard. Yes, it's a lot to feel all of these things. But overall, if I look at my overall well-being, every level, physical, emotional, spiritually, mentally, all levels, I love how I feel today.
Yeah.
Even in those moments on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday where I was spiraling and I couldn't communicate because my body, like all of that, I feel that when I came through that on Wednesday and those words started pouring out, the way that feels is I don't have words to share. Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, I was exhausted Wednesday night, but it was a good exhausted because I let so much out and I faced a lot of things and I found that growth. And yeah, it feels amazing.
I think there's a fear of facing this stuff because it's going to be really uncomfortable, and we wonder if we can actually do it. We wonder if we're actually strong enough to face like the heaviness of whatever it is that we're feeling, and which is why we remain trapped in a pattern of avoidance behavior. And I think self punishment is really, in one sense, actually there's an element of it to it. We might perceive something like compassion for ourselves as weakness, and we're afraid to show that. Or we might connect it to a sense of worthlessness and lack of self-esteem. But the flip side of that is that also we're going to become aware of our flaws, our dark spots, the dark side of our humanity in a sense. And so we feel a sense of shame around this. But the truth is, every one of us has, could we say, like a dark side, or maybe not even a dark side as much as like an imperfect
It is
side.
a dark side.
Yeah.
Because I think we do. We have dark thoughts. We just don't admit that we have dark thoughts.
Yeah.
And since I started saying that out loud after my brother passed away, saying like, "Ooh, I went to a really dark place and I had some really dark thoughts," and people go, "What do you mean?" And when I tell them, like, "Oh no, when I say dark, I mean like I didn't want to live anymore. Like
Yeah.
I as dark as you can go,"
Yeah.
and they go, "Oh, I've had dark thoughts." And it's just giving them the safety that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And I do think most of us at some point we've all gone through hard things if we're an
Yeah.
adult. I mean, even kids, like we've all
Yeah.
gone through hard things and we all have dark thoughts. And I mean, I talk about that, just being perfectly imperfect, right? This whole thing that we always need to be perfect. No, let's focus on being perfectly imperfect. Let's embrace, I'm not saying we go and act on these dark thoughts. It's not what I'm saying, but it's okay to hear them, acknowledge them, find where they're coming from and move through them.
It doesn't make you a bad person for the thoughts that enter your head. Like thoughts can be a really weird thing. Just like dreams. Dreams are my wife sometimes has these intensely crazy vivid dreams because she's very visual and creative. And after when we wake up in the morning and we're kind of just chatting, she'll share with me like some of what she dreamed. And it's funny because sometimes I'm like this big jerk in her dreams. We've been together for 17 years, like, and I'm like, my gosh, like, where does this guy come from? Um, but it could be like her brain processing some of her previous past negative experiences with men, and then it gets sort of embodied by me because I'm the most present sort of male physically in her life. But like, it doesn't make us a bad human being for having dark thoughts. We don't choose them. We don't ask for them. They actually randomly appear as our brain is trying to make sense of our experience.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the word avoidance with, the self-punishment piece. And absolutely for me, it is avoidance because I'm feeling something I don't want to feel,
Yep.
whether it's, I went out and drank too much and maybe I made a bad decision. I didn't get enough sleep this week because I was scrolling on social media because I was trying to distract myself and avoid everything. And so then those things don't work. And now all of a sudden I'm in this place where I'm going to fall into my self-punishment cycle. Well, it's still avoidance. I'm still avoiding why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, and I'm still avoiding why I made the choices that I made to get to my self-punishment loop.
Yeah, and I think that's super interesting. Many people have done this, I'm quite sure, where we distract ourselves until we're so exhausted we fall asleep so that we don't actually have to lie alone in the dark in bed at night and be alone and present with our thoughts in that moment where maybe we do feel vulnerable. And so it's like, well, I'll just do this until I'm absolutely exhausted so I don't have to think about it. There are people that I work with that I use the phrase addicted to overwhelm. It's actually this pattern of behavior where they bring so much into their life and become overwhelmed, and it becomes their default operating mode. And it's like if I'm anything less than overwhelmed, there's a teeny weeny little gap where I might think and I might feel and I might actually but it's like the end of that road is a breakdown.
Do you think that sometimes when we do that, and when I say we, I mean me, um, go to that place of overwhelm? Because I'll do the same thing. I'll just keep adding things to my plate, and
Oh,
then I don't have to
yeah.
do this. But then I get a sense of, wow, I just did all that. Like that's pretty freaking awesome. And I almost kind of gain a positive out of the fact that, look what I just did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
I
know.
think to a degree, we don't want to say avoidance behavior is entirely problematic, because there is a time there are times in our experience where we go, I actually don't have the capacity to process the weight of what I'm feeling right now, and so I'm going to maybe go into an avoidance behavior pattern. But it really kind of depends what it is. So if we have the self-awareness, like, you would recognize that, okay, in the headspace I'm in right now, it probably isn't a good idea for me to go and start drinking. um that's an easy, like, alcohol is an easy way to change the channel in our head. Well, sort of. It can be a real double edged, that one, because that one
Mhm.
can also unlock some doors that maybe that it shouldn't. Um, but like for me, like binge eating was a way to basically force feed my brain into shutting down. Like, I'm just going to keep giving you the stimulus of this junk food, the dopamine stimulus, that you can't process this. I'm going to force you to not be able to process it, because I felt like in that moment I didn't have the capacity for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think avoidance is again, I mean, everything to me is about balance, and there's good and bad, and there's the double-edged sword, and there's all of these things that go along with all these words that we're using. And by that, yeah, avoidance sometimes is necessary. Or I guess for me, I don't always view it as avoidance. Like this morning, again, stuff happening with my brother's estate, lawyer calling, all this stuff. And I had my cry in my car. And then it was like I came home and I did a few things off my to-do list that have been on it for like 6 months. And it was just like, okay, I'm just going to focus on what I can focus on and I'm just going to get these things done. So it was avoidance of what I was feeling in a way, but it also allowed me to feel good about getting those things off of my to-do list. And then it just kind of on I went with my day.
Yeah, and I think, like a really skilled therapist in a therapy session, here's where they can be incredibly valuable, because I've been through trauma therapy and as well. It's just, it's like they can open a box in your brain and unpack a little bit of that box, and then close the box and put it away again, and say, "Well, we'll deal with more of this like next time." So now it's safely tucked away until we come into this space and we open it up again. And so that that's sometimes a necessary thing. I think what we want to avoid is letting that become our default to the extent that we never ever deal with this. Because
Yes.
I remember I was having a conversation earlier today, and this is kind of one of the things that it's centered on is, if you're always too busy to deal with this, that pattern is going to be in place, and there is never a convenient time to deal with this.
Yeah.
And so at some point in time, you do need to step up and say, okay, there's never a good time to deal with this, but if I don't at least open the door and start dealing with this stuff, the end of that road is a breakdown, and that's where we're forced to deal with it on the terms that we wouldn't have any control over, that we wouldn't choose.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you mentioned the therapist and the box. Two of the things that I learned early in my therapy journey was when an experience is overwhelming me and the trauma is just, keeping me in this place. I could give myself, the first day I could give myself 10 minutes to think about it, 10 minutes to dwell on it, 10 minutes to whatever I needed to do, be in that space, but that was not positive. But then when those 10 minutes were up, I was done. And then I could give myself another 10 minutes later that day, but I had to like schedule myself time where I could dwell or do whatever I needed to do. And it was okay to then close the box and put it
Yeah.
away, knowing that I was going to get to, because sometimes we get, or again, when I say we, I mean me, I don't know how
Mhm.
other people feel, but I do start to, I can't even think of the word right now, but obsess. I
Mhm.
obsess
Yeah.
about these things and I cannot stop my brain. And so that being allowed, given permission, giving myself
Yeah.
permission to close the box, put it away. But more importantly for me, it was giving myself permission to bring that box out again later in the day at, 2 o'clock for 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, almost like scratch the itch that you're told you shouldn't scratch.
Yeah.
And I love that advice, because I had a coach. It was slightly different, but she had me spend 10 minutes being unapologetically selfish, um, because I was the proverbial set myself on fire to keep others warm, just give and give and give and give. But that was kind of a type of me avoiding actually dealing with the problems I had to face. So, like my obesity, the extra weight that I was carrying wasn't just a food problem, because it wasn't as though I didn't know what healthy eating was. It was me spending all of my energy helping other people as a way of avoiding dealing with the things I need to deal with in myself. And so one of the things that she had me do was spend 10 minutes in every day being unapologetically selfish. And her words were something like, drink milk out of the jug, fart in the shower, sing at the top of your lungs, just just do something where you're not thinking about anybody else in those 10 minutes. And after that, you can go back to setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, but you have to spend 10 minutes a day being unapologetically selfish um, each day.
Well, I think that's where, again, we talk about therapy being important because that's tailored advice for you. And
Yeah.
mine was tailored advice for me. And that's what you get when you go to therapy. You don't get a, one size fits all. You
Yeah.
get, this is for you and try this. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But you can see, like you said, it's similar advice, but yet it's different because what we were facing was different.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for anybody that's watching, I'm kind of curious if you experience or struggle with self-punishment or negative self-talk or things like that. One of the tools that I've used also is putting a name to the voice in my head that's really, really cruel in a sense, and I call it old jerk face. Um, I often say to people like maybe make it a Disney villain or something like that, you know. But I call mine old jerk face. An old jerk face lives in like a Western town, like an 1850s Western town, like dusty desert sort of town, and he's the bad guy with the black cowboy hat, and
Does he have
you
the black jacket too?
yeah, I mean, like, why I have all of this visual planned out in my head, I don't know, but it's just like that's who this voice in my head is. And it's interesting because what I'm doing in one sense is I'm creating a disconnect between me and the voice that says all these negative things about me, that it's actually not me in a sense. And so again, I'm not exactly sure where I got that tool from, but it's a way because I don't want to take the negative self-talk and really solidify it into like a part of my identity, so to speak. But say, okay, these things are in my head, but that's old jerkface talking to me. That's not me. And so old jerkface, at a certain point in time, I'm just going to tell him to shut up and like leave town, basically.
Yeah, I don't have a name for mine, but I've done the exercises where you picture yourself on the couch and you take that main person of your head and you put them on the couch beside you. And
I like
there's
that.
this
Yeah.
actual person beside you saying these awful things to you. And how do you react? Well, you're like, I'm sorry, I'm leaving. You don't get to talk to me that way. And so
Yeah.
it's the same thing though, right? It's separating them from you so that you can realize this isn't me.
Yeah. I love that one actually. I'm gonna pull old next time old jerkface starts chattering in my head. I'm gonna like put them on the couch beside me, and then I'm gonna
Yeah.
tell old jerkface like exactly what I think. Um, well, this has been a really fascinating conversation that's taken a few twists and turns that I didn't expect. But it's always a great conversation because I've said it a couple times, but your willingness to be vulnerable and just express like your lived human experience. All of those imperfect flaws, it really I think it opens the door to people being more comfortable with the fact that it's okay to be human and struggle. You can have it all together in one area of your life, in another area of your life, really
Totally.
sort of struggle to sort of feel like you're trying to patch it all together. It's all of us are just I'm like none of us actually know what we're doing in one sense. We're all just figuring this out as we go along because every stage of life is new to us in our lived experience. And so I really appreciate your willingness to open up and share.
Well, thanks for having me. I love coming on here. I do like to share. I never used to, but I like it now because it helps people and it helps me too. Talking through things. Every time I talk through them, I learn something new about myself. Or, I mean, I learned a few things from you today. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Well, I know that you're going to be back because we have like another conversation that we're going to have, and I actually don't want to give the topic away. I want to leave people in suspense, but it's probably going to be a fairly powerful, hard hitting topic as well, and I think a really really important one. And I'm very interested to dive into it from my perspective versus your perspective. And so, stay tuned in the coming weeks. Nicki's definitely going to be back on this, and we're going to talk about a really hard hitting topic that needs to be brought into the public discussion again. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in and have a great weekend. And this is going to be us signing off and waving goodbye until StreamYard terminates the broadcast.